big thank you to the Friends of the Library who helped make all these programs happen. Big thank you to all of you for attending in person and by Zoom, and for all the colleagues like Janet who keep the place running, and especially for tonight's speaker, Bruce Benton. As one of our attendees said before I let everyone in, Bruce is probably the coolest guy he knows. So I think that's like a terrific intro. Bruce was instrumental in the continuing, the eradication of river blindness in Africa, and it continues this work today. It's the culmination of a 40-year career focused on development assistance for Africa. Much of Bruce's career involved leading a World Bank-sponsored partnership to eliminate this disease through Africa, and his leadership was recognized by the World Bank president.
I'm sorry, your voice is echoing a lot.
Oh,
Message.
you know what? Maybe if I go over here, it'll be better. If I'm here, is it better?
Speak a little.
So
Yeah, yes, it is better.
All right, great, thank you. Thanks for that feedback. So his leadership was recognized by the president of the World Bank with a special presidential award in 2000. And he began his career as a Peace Corps volunteer in Guinea. I suspect we have a number of Peace Corps volunteers on the island. Back in the mid-60s, he subsequently earned his master's degree in African Studies from Johns Hopkins University and one in Development Economics from the University of Michigan. He was responsible for commodity negotiations and the international development banks in the Office of the Secretary of the U.S. Treasury through the 70s, and advised the U.S. Congress on foreign assistance prior to joining the World Bank in 1982. In retirement, Bruce taught global health at Georgetown University. He and his wife, Patricia, who's here this evening, lived in Bethesda, Maryland, not far from where I grew up. And they raised their 4 children there. But now, as we all have seen the light, they are in the Pacific Northwest, and they enjoy a life of kayaking, hiking, and riding, and playing pickleball. I hope to see you on the court soon. And now I'll hand it over to Bruce.
Thank you, Carol. And thank you for leading and organizing the Endurance series. I'm honored to be part of this and to be presenting tonight on this unusual date, 2/22/22. No, 2/2/22, which will never come around again. The book, which came out a year ago, tells the story of the near half-century effort to control and eventually eliminate river blindness or onchocerciasis throughout Africa. It is considered to be one of the major successes in global health, up there with smallpox eradication, which occurred in 1980, and more recently, elimination of polio in the developing world. I felt obligated to write this book because I was the person who served the longest working on these programs, and I felt strongly that there were important lessons to be learned from this success that could benefit other control efforts, disease control efforts. The agenda that I'd like to cover here is, first of all, to talk about the disease, river blindness. The technical word for the disease is onchocerciasis. I prefer the word onco. Onchocerciasis is used all over Africa. Onchocerciasis is a word that's difficult to pronounce and difficult to spell. And by the way, if you see a car driving around with an unusual onco license plate, it's probably me or my wife, Patricia. I'll talk about the discovery of Ivermectin and the Merck donation to give it free. The second program, which I helped set up to control onchocerciasis throughout the rest of Africa. And then I'll talk about the Onco Partnership, which was a large and unique partnership. The breadth of the problem of onchocerciasis is shown here on this 1975 prevalence map. There were 150 million people impacted by the disease in 31 countries. 99.6% of the world's cases of the disease occur in Africa. The disease also exists in 6 countries in the Americas, but it's just a drop in the bucket compared to Africa. And the The disease was brought over to the Americas by the slave trade in the 1800s. Onco is a devastating disease. It causes tremendous suffering. It maims but does not kill. It particularly affects the poorest of the poor, and it's a huge impediment to economic development and in the rural sector and agricultural production. The manifestations, there are two manifestations of the disease. One is blindness and one is skin disease. The photo here shows an eye blinded by the disease. Microscopic parasites enter the eye and cause tunnel vision, and eventually permanent blindness. The average onset of blindness is 30 years of age. When people are at their prime, in the prime of life, it has a huge impact on human productivity throughout the continent of Africa. In Bambara, the largest ethnic language in Mali, the disease is called Mara, which also means lion stare. And I think you could probably tell from these photos, one taken in Cameroon, the other in Ghana, why that is the case. You have this fixed, glassy-eyed stare, which resembles a lion's gaze. These are two couples that were blinded in Nigeria. They have these sticks which they use to get around, and what happens is the children lead them around. And this is a scene that's been seen for centuries in Africa. Children taking care of their elders and leading them around. The tragedy of all this, of course, is the children can't, they spend their whole time taking care of the elders. They can't go to school, and they don't need to lead the normal life of a child. We also had cases where children were leading long lines of Uncle Blind. The photo on the right, on the left, sorry, is a photo taken in Chad in the 1960s, a classic photo taken by the World Health Organization. And more recently, a similar photo of long lines of blind being led by children in Sudan, South Sudan, in the 1990s. The other manifestation of the disease is skin disease. And these are photos of two women who have these unsightly skin lesions, and they are caused by the microscopic worm migrating through the skin. And that affects, of course, their marriage prospects. And it's also accompanied by incessant unbearable itching, which as a result, people are unable to function, even do the basic household shares. So itching was a big problem. You also have leopard skin, which is the depigmentation of the legs due to the microscopic worms migrating under the skin in the leg area. The disease is transmitted by the parasite is called Onchocerca volvulus. This is a photo of the adult worm. It is about two and a half feet long. It lives for 15 years in the human body and produces millions and millions of microscopic worms that fill up the body and do all the damage. The adult worms are usually found in nodules around the waist area. The man on the left has 4 nodules. The one on the right, a young boy, 8 years old, who already has the adult worm nodule. And he will begin to experience the skin lesions in another 5 years, and another 15 to 20 years probably will be blind. The the parasite is transmitted from person to person by a fiercely biting black fly called Cymboleum damnosum. It travels up to 300 kilometers with the wind currents. And during the first program, we had no drug. So the only way we could control the disease is by preventing the fly from reproducing and spreading the disease. We did this with insecticides. I emphasize environmentally safe insecticides. We had an ecological committee which vetoed the use of any insecticide which was thought to have environmental damage, and they monitored the program. They monitored the spraying throughout the life of the program to ensure there were no adverse effects on fish, flora, and fauna. The photo on the right shows the larval stage of the fly, which attaches itself to sticks, stones, and leaves in the water, in the rivers. In the spraying of the insecticide goes down the rivers, kills off the larva, prevents the fly from hatching and flying and biting and spreading the disease. During the first program, it was a vector control program, keeping the fly from propagating. We had a fleet of 12 helicopters and 2 fixed-wing aircraft that sprayed all over West Africa. At the height of the program, the helicopters and the fixed-wing aircraft were spraying 30,000 miles of rivers a week, which is twice the length of the Mississippi, Missouri, Ohio, and Columbia rivers combined. It was a huge operation. It was at that time the largest intercountry health program in the world. The pilots knew where to spray because we had about 200 flycatchers spread out throughout West Africa, sitting on the riverbanks, capturing the flies, dissecting them to see if they were infective, then sending that information to the headquarters in Ouagadougou, which would then be relayed to the pilots in the helicopters to know where to spray. It was a high-tech operation and it worked very well. The first program was an 11-country program. It was launched by Robert McNamara, president of the World Bank, in 1974. McNamara had gone to Upper Volta in 1972, and he saw the disease firsthand in this area. If you can see that, I guess you can't see that. It was right here, this whole area. And when seeing the disease firsthand, he realized that there were no prospects for development in this whole sub-region of West Africa, which is 3 times the size of France, unless we somehow could control the disease. At the time, the World Bank had never had a project in health. This became the first project they supported. The program got started in 74, and it covered a 7-country area, which you can see here with this black line, this whole area. That was where the control operations were concentrated for the first decade. And then I was asked to manage the program beginning of 1985. And my role was to mobilize all the funding for the program and to chair the committee of sponsoring agencies, which consisted of the World Bank, WHO, UNDP, and FAO. And when I took over, unfortunately, the program was in crisis. It was in crisis because the flies were propagating mainly here to the west and to the southeast. Flies were becoming infective, and then we're traveling back into the central area. The wind currents generally go from southwest to northeast. So we realized that we would have to enlarge the program to cover the limits of the breeding sites of the black fly if we were able to bring this program to a successful conclusion. And so that was my first big task. And doubling the size of the program was expensive. It cost twice as much as the just controlling in the central area. So I had to run around trying to convince the donors to increase their contributions, and I was able to bring on 10 new donors. And eventually we were able to achieve the expansion, but it took 10 years to do it. And this area had a population of 35 million. About 60% of the 35 million were infected. That's 21 million people infected with the disease, and you had about 1 to 2 million people already blind. So the operations continued from the late 80s through the 90s, and we finally were able to continue operations throughout this entire 11-country area, and it wound up working extremely well. We were able to close the program in 2002, and this was the result. The disease had been completely eliminated in West Africa, with the exception of a few pockets of the disease, which you can see, but Sierra Leone. A civil war broke out in Sierra Leone in the early 1990s and continued for a decade. We couldn't get into Sierra Leone with the spraying operations, and we couldn't deliver the drug, which later became available about 2/3 of the way through the program. So, but the follow-on program, which I'll talk about in a little bit, was able to support operations in Sierra Leone, and eventually the disease was eliminated in Sierra Leone as well. So one of the real benefits of controlling the disease in that sub-region of West Africa was opening up 250,000 square kilometers of arable land, which is about the size of Oregon. Those people could not inhabit those areas or cultivate those areas because the disease was so severe, but it happened to be the best land near rivers. So opening up that swath of land, which covered 10 countries, turned out to be very important. People spontaneously resettled that area, began crop production, and all those 10 countries were food deficit countries before the program began. When it ended, they were food secure countries, and they were exporting agricultural products. And 2 countries, Burkina Faso and Mali, actually became the largest cotton producers in Africa. They were producing cotton in those onco-free areas, and they experienced growth rates of more than 10% a year throughout the 1990s, because they were able to produce that agricultural production and export the cash crops. So 2/3 of the way through the program, a drug became available called Ivermectin. I'll digress a bit here because it's an interesting story of how Ivermectin was discovered. Merck in the late 70s, early 1980s, was looking for powerful anti-parasitic agents for drugs for the veterinary market. And they signed an agreement with the Kitasato Institute in Japan that specialized in natural product isolation. And Satoshi Omura, who was the head of the Kitasato Institute, whose photo is here, he found 54 compounds which he thought might be promising, sent them to Merck for Merck to screen. One of those compounds contained the ivermectin molecule, but he didn't know which one it was at the time. It went to Merck, and Bill Campbell, a senior scientist at Merck, shown here on the left, screened those compounds, discovered ivermectin, was astonished to find that it was 100 times more powerful than any other antiparasitic agent he had ever encountered. He also thought it might work against onchocerciasis. So he told his boss, who was the CEO of Merck, Roy Vagelos, also shown in this picture. And Vagelos was enthusiastic about doing the human clinical trials with ivermectin to see what the results would be, whether it was safe and whether it was effective. The clinical trials showed that one dose of ivermectin would kill off 95% of the microscopic worms in the body with no side effects. However, it would not kill the adult worm. So it had to be given at least once a year for the 15-year lifespan of the adult worm in order to prevent blindness and the itching. So with these results, Vagelos asked the French regulatory agency to consider approving the drug. They did in 1987 for onchocerciasis. And at that point, Vagelos had to decide what to do. He knew that the countries and the populations that were infected were far too important by the drug. So he took the unprecedented, remarkable decision to give the drug free to as many who need it for as long as it is needed to eliminate onchocerciasis. It really stunned the pharmaceutical world because no pharmaceutical company had ever done something like this. And Merck has now spent more than $1 billion on this donation program. Vagelos and Campbell are as is Amora, are real heroes in the story. This photo, by the way, was taken at the Nobel Prize in Medicine ceremony in 2015 in Stockholm, where the Nobel Prize was given jointly to Bill Campbell on the left and Satoshi Omura in the previous slide for the discovery of ivermectin. So with the free drug, I realized that we now might be able to control the disease in the rest of Africa. There were 20 countries endemic with the disease, with an at-risk population of 115 million, and an area which was 4 times the size of the West African program area. And so I went back to the Committee of Sponsoring Agencies, which I was chairing at the time, and got them then to put together a program that would rely on ivermectin to treat onchocerciasis throughout the rest of Africa. And we succeeded in doing that. And this program, called the African Program for Onchocerciasis Control, or APOC, was launched in 1995. One of the questions, however, became how are we going to get the drug out to the rural populations? Many of the communities where the disease was most severe were very remote. You couldn't get there by vehicles. So a scientist at the Tropical Disease Research Program in Geneva, associated with WHO, recommended trying out a novel distribution method called community-directed treatment. So under this concept, the communities would take full responsibility for getting the drug out, for monitoring side effects, for keeping records, for storing the drug, and for following the Merck protocol to treat people with the disease. No one thought this would work, but this scientist, Hans Remme, said, I'm sure it will. He said, these African communities are extremely well organized. He gave examples of organize the funeral for a chief, or keeping track of land ownership over generations without anything written down. And he said the communities are capable of doing this. And it turned out remarkably well. The photo here shows the man on the left is a volunteer community distributor. All the community distributors were volunteers. and has a dosing pole here, and he's carrying the drug. You had to figure out how many tablets each person could get by measuring their height, because the scales were often inaccurate. And the remarkable thing is that the communities were able to distribute the drug to 70 to 80% of the infected population. And you needed only to get to 65% of the infected population to eliminate the disease over time. And studies showed that the other ways of getting the drug out would have been mobile teams or through the regular health service. And both of those would have reached a much lower percentage of the infected population, under 50%. So community-directed treatment really made this whole ivermectin distribution process work. Here are a series of maps which show declining prevalence of onchocerciasis beginning in 1975. You've seen this map already. By 2015, this was the result. The disease was gone, and that's 11-country area in West Africa. It was gone in Nigeria, which has the largest infected population in Africa. It was gone in East Africa, Tanzania, Uganda. However, it continued to be a problem in the Congo, Ethiopia, South Sudan, and Angola. One of the reasons for this is that these countries were experiencing political instability and a lot of civil unrest, which made it more difficult to get the drug out in those particular countries. However, from 2010 until the present, the APOC program, through community-directed treatment, has been reaching more than 120 million people per year with ivermectin. And the disease continues to decline. More recent data shows that the disease will be at this level in 2025, 4 years from now. And at this point, it will be largely eliminated from Africa, except for about 7 pockets in the Congo, and those will disappear by 2030, almost certainly, provided the drug continues to be distributed. And there's no indication that it will not. It's free from Merck, and the communities do it on a volunteer basis, so pretty certain it'll get out and completely eliminate the disease on the continent. It's important for me to note that we had 5, I worked closely with 5 African directors. They were based in Ouagadougou. They managed all the staff that were spread out through West Africa and the rest of Africa. They were extremely competent scientists. They were also really dedicated professionals and great managers. And without their support and leadership, the programs would not have been the success that they were. I should point out, and I forgot to mention, that when McNamara launched this program in 1975, I guess I didn't mention this, it was the first program in health that the bank had ever. Did I say that? Okay. And today, because this was a success, today is the World Bank is the largest source of financing for health projects in the developing world. And this probably would not have happened if the ONCO program hadn't been the success it was. By the way, The directors were, there was a medical doctor, 2 entomologists, 1 ophthalmologist, and a PhD biologist, extremely competent people. This slide shows the partnership. There were more than 100,000 partners. My role was to try to keep this partnership together. There were a number of devices that were used. We structured the second program so that everybody had a seat at the table. We made sure that the objectives were clear and consistent over time, so that all the partners were on the same page and pulled in the same direction. I spent a lot of time with the donors, and the top 3 donors were the United States, the World Bank, and the Netherlands. I tried to visit every donor once a year in capitals to keep them abreast of the progress and keep them on board. I was able, the programs were very popular with the donors. They were popular because they alleviated suffering, they focused on the poor, and they contributed to development. So it wasn't all that difficult to mobilize the funding from the donors, but I was able to raise $750 million over my 20-year tenure at the bank, and the cover the annual cost of $38 million for the 2 programs. That sounds like a lot of money. However, the cost of the program worked out to under 25%, 25 cents per person protected per year. It's extremely cost effective. The other partners were the sponsoring agencies. The key ones were World Health Organization, World Bank. We had 35 NGOs. Sightsavers from the UK and the Carter Center were the most active NGOs. We had Merck. We had research entities, Johns Hopkins University and the Task Force for Global Health in Atlanta. And then, of course, we had the 150,000 rural African communities that were getting the drug out. A device we tried to use to hold the main partners together was a symbolic one, but it was the riverblindness statue. And in the beginning of the 1990s, philanthropist John Moores, based in Houston, Texas, started the Riverblindness Foundation when he found out that the drug was going to be given free. And he commissioned a sculptor who lived in Alaska to produce these 35 of these maquettes, which are the statues of a young boy leading a blind man. This one, which I have right here, was given to me by Jimmy Carter in 2019. I'm very proud of that statue. But his recommendation was when Roy Vagelos was about to retire from Merck in 1995, that Skip Wallen produce a larger than life-size version of this statue, which he did. The mold he used was able to produce 6 of these statues. And we then tried to get the statues placed in all the major partners around the world. One of which was the World Bank. This is the World Bank statue in the atrium of the main complex of the World Bank. It was very difficult to get the statue in there because it's 8 foot high. We had to get a crane to put it in. We had to open the side of the bank to get it in. There's also one of these statues at the entrance of Merck's world headquarters in New Jersey. There's one in the Carter Center, the garden of the Carter Center, as an active NGO in the program. I got one placed at the entrance to the World Health Organization in Geneva, because the World Health Organization was the executing agency of these programs. And then one placed in the Royal Tropical Institute in Amsterdam, because the Netherlands was the largest donor per capita and the largest donor in Europe. And finally, President Carter I got one placed in at the world headquarters of the Lions Club in Oak Brook, Illinois, and the Lions Club was also an NGO. Next photo shows a picture I took in 2001 of Robert McNamara standing in front of the statue in the World Bank. McNamara was extremely proud of this program. He had an office after he retired. He had an office near the World Bank, and I would go over from time to time to sit in his office and brief him on how the program operations were going. He loved this program, and I think he was as proud of this World Bank project as any. For me, the high point of my career came in the end of 2000 when the president of the World Bank, Jim Wilkinson, recognized me with a special presidential award for leading the onco-elimination effort in Africa. Jim also wrote the foreword to my book in the fall of 2020, and sadly he died 2 months later, suffering from the aftermath of a stroke. Let me just sum up here on what I think are the reasons for success of these programs. First of all, there was long-term commitment by all the partners. The donor community stuck together, same donors for 35 years, which is unprecedented in foreign assistance programs. It was a comprehensive approach. No countries, no populations were left out, no matter how poor and remote. This is a contrast with COVID, because you have huge populations now being left out in Africa, Asia, and Latin America, because they're not getting the vaccine. And it's going to make it very difficult to eliminate that disease. They were cost effective, as I mentioned earlier. At no time during the 43 years did the cost of the program exceed $1 per person protected per year. It had major economic development and humanitarian benefits. I mentioned the 250,000 square kilometers that were opened up for food production and other agricultural products. But also the program, through its control operations, increased human productivity dramatically across Africa by preventing people from going blind and preventing the itching. And of course, it reduced, alleviated suffering across Sub-Saharan Africa. The programs had clear, consistent objectives over time. As a result, the partners were on the same page, pulled in the same direction, and this was, I think, extremely important. There was treatment buy-in. Everybody in the West African area was protected by the vector control operations. For the rest of Africa, they all lined up to take the drug, primarily to stop the itching, not because they might become blind in 20 years, but to stop the itching. And this, again, is another contrast with COVID, where you have vaccine resistance, particularly in large amounts in the United States, which makes it difficult to reach everybody with treatment and prolongs the disease and results in more variants arising, which continues to prolong the disease. There was ownership by the affected communities that took full responsibility in getting the drug out. The community-directed treatment method worked extremely well. And finally, it was a regional, multi-country approach. You couldn't go country by country because the fly traveled such long distances, crossing borders. But this regional approach had benefits because it fostered cross-country collaboration, which made the whole program work together better than it otherwise would. Okay, I'll stop here, Carol, And
Okay,
happy to respond to questions.
great. We have a bunch of comments. Let me check on my voice. Oh, my voice. Boy, you have some fans. So let's see, let me start at the top here. Bob and Ann took some, yeah, that sounds right. There's a TUTSM. Congrats, Bruce, on such a fantastic contribution to world health. Ed Andrew says, amazing. More from him later. Fred Klein says, Bruce, your life has been the epitome of the notion of making a difference. Big kudos. And then Steve Jelly has a question. He says, you may have missed it, but it looks like there's a geographic limitation to the spread. And then well done, see you on the court. Is there something you can say, yes, about the geographic limitation to the spread? Like, was it rivers, borders of the countries? What limited spread?
Why
Wait,
was
so you
it,
want me to respond to that?
why was it only in those areas?
Okay, so, yeah, the climate is just right in the areas where the disease existed. It doesn't exist in South Africa and some of the Southern African countries because of the temperate climate. North of, once you get into the Sahara Desert, there are no rivers for the fly to breed. So that's the reason it was concentrated in that central part of Africa across the continent.
Great. And then Ed Andrews says they designed an exhibition at the Gates Foundation in 2017 called Countdown to Zero. This was in conjunction with the Carter Foundation. It was about eradicating certain diseases in the world that were within our reach of eradication. This was one of them that was featured because of your work, of this work. And Mary Johansson says, Bruce, thank you so much for your decades of commitment to this amazing project. Judy Scott asks, is the community-directed treatment being used now in other World Bank health projects?
Yeah, okay. But let me answer the last one. Yes, community-directed treatment became the approach to delivering essential drugs throughout Sub-Saharan Africa after this experience. Drugs were piggybacked on the delivery of Ivermectin to address several of the other major neglected tropical diseases, one of which is lymphatic filariasis. One is the soil-transmitted helminths, which are the intestinal worms. And by the way, ivermectin does work against those two diseases, but you needed other drugs to complement ivermectin to address those other diseases. I think I can't stress what a miracle molecule ivermectin was for parasites. It worked against lymphatic filariasis, which is also elephantiasis, and it worked against intestinal worms, and works against head lice and scabies, and it's a great drug for parasites. But yes, the answer is community-directed treatment has become the principal method for delivering essential drugs in Africa, particularly because you can get it out in the rural, hard to reach rural communities. Yeah.
Thanks. Can you speak to why ivermectin has been part of the COVID conversation?
Not completely. About a year and a half ago, in an Australian study, they tried using ivermectin in a petri dish to see if it would kill the virus. And they learned that in order for it to work, it had to be 100 times more, 100 times, 2,000 greater dose in order to kill the parasite. So that got everybody thinking, well, maybe this will work against COVID. But almost all the studies have shown it does not. There are a few studies that showed it does, but those studies, there are a lot of problems with those studies. One of them was withdrawn because the approach was just the wrong approach. Another one was highly criticized because the data were fabricated. And one of the hospitals where the study claimed to have been taken place denied that the study was ever taking place there. So there's a lot of manufacturing data to somehow show that this works again against COVID. But the reality is this is an antiparasitic drug, not an antiviral drug. And there have been problems with people taking this because they take high doses of the drug, used in the veterinary market because that's how they can get it easily, and it results in overdoses and deaths. Nobody recognized in the health field like FDA, WHO, and others recommends using ivermectin for COVID.
We have two more questions. One is, why was the Netherlands so involved? Does that country have a tradition of World Health projects?
The Netherlands was in their foreign assistance program. They were particularly interested in the Sahel countries, which is where the first program focused. And they're very interested in poverty alleviation, and they just loved the program, and they thought it would contribute to agricultural development in West Africa, and that was also important to them. So, yeah,
Very
they were
interesting.
large.
One more question through chat and then we'll open up to the room.
I
Has
answered my
community drug
question.
treatment been used in remote areas in other continents or just Africa?
I'm not aware of it elsewhere. It particularly works in Africa because the communities are so well organized, and you don't have that sort of setup in a lot of other countries outside Africa.
Right. And questions in the room? Yes.
Yeah, I just have a question because Western Africa and Central Africa during this time frame, from a political standpoint, that was a very difficult, I suspect, geographic region. I was just wondering if you can speak about kind of your experiences and how did you manage that?
Yeah, well, there are a lot of coups in Burkina Faso, by the way. There was a civil war in Sierra Leone. There's a lot of civil disturbance in the Central African Republic, in Congo, and Angola was a problem. Not so much because of the civil disturbance, but because the government was not all that supportive of the control effort. We just kept at it. And, it was a long program. It was 42 years long. And so eventually they were able to get the drug to the right people. But sometimes it was difficult.
Yeah, that's very no way imagine. And by the way, I stand by my statement. Bruce is the coolest person I know.
Tell them where the ivermectin was found. I always found that so fascinating.
Okay, so Satoshi Omura found it in a compound on a golf course in Ito, Japan. The photo I showed is of him. I'm sorry I didn't explain this, but I gotta go back.
It's okay.
No, it shows him on that golf course where he found the compound here it is. This is a reenactment of his finding of the compound that included the ivermectin molecule, but he did not know it right away. It wasn't until it was screened at Merck that they discovered the ivermectin molecule, and this compound that included the ivermectin molecule has never ever been found anywhere else in the world. And they've dug up that whole golf course. And they've never found it since. It's remarkable. And on top of that, when Bill Campbell was doing the screening, it was called a tandem assay. He was using a mouse, and the mouse almost died because of an impurity in the screening process. If that mouse had died, ivermectin might not have ever been discovered.
And one other thing, explain to people, sorry, having lived with this for 40 years.
Pronounce my name, of course.
Explain to people
Joey.
how
Nobody knows.
it's
how to pronounce
transmitted
my
from
name.
person to person, like
Let's
how the
see.
fly
Let's see.
bites and then,
I thought I did this.
but that's.
Okay, so the fly picks up the microscopic parasite.
First question she
And
asked.
then the female of the fly needs a blood meal
He
to lay her egg.
laughed when he-
She bites somebody
Anyway,
to get that blood. That person may be infected. She picks up a microscopic parasite. The parasite goes through a transformation in the fly. Then the fly bites somebody else and transmitted that microscopic parasite into the second person. And then it can grow into an adult worm, 15 feet, 2.5 feet long. It lives for 15 years. But it has to go through that transformation in the fly in order to mature into adult worm.
And then what's happening in the nodules?
In the nodule, that's where the adult worm is living. There's a stationary nodules. They're painless as I understand it. They just remain there. It's really two worms. It's the female worm, which is 2.5 feet long, and a male worm, which is somewhat shorter. And that's
Oh,
why
God.
they reproduce.
So it's
Or
reproducing in the
produce-
nodules.
In the nodule, it produces these millions of microscopic worms that then migrate or fill up the body and migrate around underneath the skin and then invade the eyes.
And the worm.
And that's
Oh, sorry.
when they invade the eyes, it's sort of toward the end.
Jen.
If they're right on the surface area, why can't they be removed?
They can be removed. It's called a nodulectomy. However, you couldn't do this for millions and millions of people. But they have been removed, yeah. And that's the worm that I showed you had been removed. That's how they got the photo of the worm.
And yours.
So I have a few observations. Was it the Robert McNamara, Secretary of Defense?
Yes.
Same guy? It's interesting. I was gonna say, and you actually brought it up, was spanning the 35 years or however long you got, especially in the United States, to all these different presidents, from Carter to Reagan to Bush to Clinton to Bush again, keeping that funding going.
Well, this was USAID, right?
It's just a,
It was USAID,
yeah.
the US aid program.
Oh, so it wasn't government money.
It was US Agency for International Development. It was government money. It was
Yeah.
government money, but because it was so cost effective, it was improving the lives of the poorest. It was very popular.
I think that
in
would
the
have
US.
been more challenging over the last 6 or 7 years to get that funding.
Yeah, probably.
The other thing is, what was in it for the World Bank? Like, what was their, like,
Well,
To me, banks
the
is
World
one-
Bank is a development institution. Okay, for starters. So they felt they had to control the disease for development purposes. That was the only way. However, Robert McNamara saw, when he went down to that area in Upper Volta, he was really struck by the suffering he saw. He went into a community near Bobo Dioulasso, and he saw children leading the blind around, and 75% of the people that in that community, which was I can't remember the name of the community, were blind, and he had never seen suffering like that, and he just said we have to do something about the disease. It's imperative. And when he first saw it, there was a multi-year drought going on in the Sahel region. And that's one of the reasons he went to Upper Volta, to figure out what to do about the drought. But he realized that this was a more important impediment to food production and agriculture in general than the drought, because the drought would end, but this wasn't going to end. This was getting worse and worse and worse. So unless there was some intervention to control it, that whole area was going to be, it's going to keep getting worse and worse. And yeah, I know, despite the fact that he was Secretary of Defense and the architect of the Vietnam War, he was a great bank president. And this is one illustration. And nobody in the bank wanted the World Bank to get involved in health because they thought the rate of return was lower in other sectors like transportation, agriculture, dams, and there's a lot of opposition to the World Bank going into this program. But when I was managing the program, I did a cost-benefit analysis, and it showed that the rate of return from the OCP program, the West African program, was 20%, which is quite a bit higher than most projects in the bank in other sectors. It was very convincing that this is the way to go for development, is controlling these widespread disease and health in general, because it increases human productivity.
Just on a follow-up, anybody's interested, I highly recommend The Fog of War. If you haven't seen it, the documentary about, and it's Robert McNamara talking about his involvement in Vietnam, just sitting on a stool talking for an hour and a half about it.
Yeah.
The Fog of War is a really amazing documentary.
Yeah, it was interesting because in 1968, he told me the story that he wanted the U.S. to pull out of Vietnam. Johnson was very upset with him, and said to him, and I know this because I talked to McNamara's wife. McNamara died in 2009, but I interviewed his wife, and she said that Johnson said to McNamara, "Are you yellow?
Sure.
And you don't want to continue to support the war?" But McNamara liked, but Johnson seemed to like McNamara and then put him up as president of the World Bank in 1968, and that's when he started.
It's amazing that a bank would have that much vision for the future. It doesn't seem congruous to other
Okay.
entities that make money. They want it right now.
And how does the money flow? So World Bank gives countries money to run the
Yeah.
program, and then the countries give the World Bank money back?
Well, so normally with most programs, the projects and their loans or credits that are to the countries where the projects were go. However, this is a regional program, and the country guarantees the loan or credit to ensure it will be paid back. That's the way the World Bank works. But in this case, it wasn't country by country, and there was a regional institution, which was the program, but that program could not guarantee that the money would be paid back. So it had to be grant financing. All of it had to be grant financing. And that's why I had to run around mobilizing the funds everywhere, because grant money was the only thing that would work.
Yeah, this wasn't traditional lending by any.
This was not traditional. This was not traditional lending.
But that slide that showed the arable land that you gained,
Yeah.
unbelievable.
Yeah, it was quite significant. And we later we had a ministerial conference on resettlement and development of the Francophone areas held in Paris, and we had several African presidents there, and the governments were encouraged to follow certain guidelines to ensure that people could freely resettle and develop these lands and do it in an environmental responsible way. And it really worked. It worked.
We have one more question in chat, and then we'll take one more question from the room, and then we'll close down. What is the next disease that should be tackled like riverblindness, and where there is hope for a similar success?
The next one.
What is the next disease
Yeah.
that should be tackled like riverblindness, and where there is hope for a similar success?
Yeah, so ivermectin works against lymphatic filariasis, which is far more widespread than onco, because it exists in India and East Asia. But in Africa, Merck agreed to provide the drug free for lymphatic filariasis as long as it was in the same country as onchocerciasis. So you don't necessarily have people with both diseases, but they decided to give it free to treat lymphatic filariasis as well. And it's been quite successful, very successful. So I was trying to think of others. Oh, I do want to say that because Merck came through with this donation, which there had been nothing ever like it before. There are 5 neglected tropical diseases. Onco is one, lymphatic filariasis is another. Trypanosomiasis is the largest cause of blindness in Africa. There's a third, schistosomiasis or bilharzia, and then there are the intestinal worms. These are all considered to be neglected tropical diseases because they don't exist anywhere else. And the developed countries are not all that interested in controlling them because it doesn't affect them directly. But because Merck made that donation, other pharmaceutical and got such great PR from this, Merck was able to hire the best scientists for years and years after, because it had made this humanitarian gesture. And there were other pharmaceutical companies that wanted then to do a similar thing. And GlaxoSmithKline was one and came out with a drug for albendazole, which is coupled with ivermectin for lymphatic filariasis, Johnson & Johnson for the intestinal worms, Pfizer for, I can't remember, Pfizer I think is for, I can't remember. Sorry, I can't, it escapes me. And then there's a German company that's also called Merck, which is given the drug free for schistosomiasis. So we now have free drugs for all of the neglected tropical diseases in the developing world. Now we have to have programs to make these work. And one of the reasons I wrote the book is because I wanted to see lessons learned from this success to apply those other disease control programs. So whether it will, I don't know.
You've done your part.
Well, yeah, I wanted to get, I was supposed to go on a book tour with this book and I couldn't do it because of COVID. So I don't know how much people are buying the book and reading it and all that, but the lessons are learned. The lessons coming out of this program are part of the book.
Wonderful. Steve says you've given him a different opinion of Robert McNamara.
Who's that?
Stephen Jelly.
Oh, Stephen Jelly, yeah, okay.
Journey.
Yeah, I mean, I talk a lot about McNamara in the book, and because it seemed to me to be clear that he was upset about his role in Vietnam, and he really wanted to do great things when he was president of the World Bank, just kind of make up for that, and this was one of them. Yeah.
Wonderful. Any other questions from the room?
One question, has the current off-label use of ivermectin impacted Merck's ability to supply it to the region, this region?
Yeah, well, Merck is only giving it for office crisis.
Yes, but the demand hasn't skyrocketed and impacted their ability to supply.
No.
Okay,
No.
okay, good.
And they, They have a factory that produces ivermectin in Haarlem in the Netherlands. It's, I don't know how much, I tried to find out how much it costs to produce it, but couldn't because it's not readily available information, but I suspect it's 10 cents or less per tablet. Yeah.
And if anyone does want to buy the book, Bruce has copies. And what's the best way?
Yeah, the book is, I think there are 4 copies at Darbo's. We have 1 copy in the library, and I just ordered 6 more copies, which came yesterday. So if people want the book, I have them. And I'd be happy to sign it and all that.
Right.
And I was able to get it at less than the price you'll find in the bookstore. So, and I would pass it on for that.
Good. I'm going to put your email in the chat for people there, and then anyone here can get it from you directly. There we go. And we have one more question from Judy. Can ivermectin reverse people who have gone blind with the disease?
Well, if you haven't reached a stage of permanent blindness, it will clear up. If you get it when you have tunnel vision but not permanent blindness, it will clear up. If it's permanent blindness, there's no way that can be recovered.
And then I'm going to ask everyone on chat how they found out about the program and would they recommend it to a friend, and I'll ask everyone in the room the same question. Would you recommend this program to a friend?
I already have.
You already have? There we go. Check.
By the way, I was concerned when COVID came along because I thought that would interrupt the distribution of the drug. But because we did it through the community-directed treatment approach, we had a volunteer distributor who would go house to house delivering the drug. And so you didn't bring people together in one central area, so it minimized the spread of COVID. And as it turned out, it seemed not to have affected the delivery of ivermectin for onchocerciasis, and it's continuing to reach more now well over 20 million people per year.
Well, I am delighted to have been able to have you here this evening. This has been super, and and thanks to everyone out in Zoom land for joining. There's some articles here I have for those in the room who want them. They look like this for everyone.
Yeah, these are basically reviews of the book.
Yeah.
From various.
Gotcha. So if anyone's interested in these articles and comes to the library, I'll have them here at the library.
Okay.
So again, sincere thanks, Bruce, and thanks everyone for coming out on such a cool night.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody. Oh, you're welcome.